this session is about divestment and the divestment movement and how this space is moulding and changing when we tackle issues of industrial meat and dairy. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with divestment. Maybe you've heard about it, maybe you joined in on protests at campus at your university, or perhaps you haven't heard about it at all and you're here to learn more about what this word means. But yeah, this session is going to be a sort of introductory session to that, and really talking about how we can mobilise on industrial meat and dairy issues by moving beyond our dinner plates. So before I start, yes, my name is Mia Watanabe. I am a campaigner at Feedback, an NGO based in London here. And yeah, I'm going to encourage you to use the chat box as much as you can. I'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. There will be a few activities in this session. So yeah, to start off, I'd love if you could put your name in the chat and give me an idea about where you are joining us from and perhaps why you're joining the session as well. I would love to know. And yeah, like I said, we're going to talk about the sort of cross-cutting issues of this, of what we call big meat and dairy or big livestock, a sort of parallel with big oil and gas, and yeah, how we mobilise, how we go beyond the dinner plate. So yeah, I'd like to start off with this Slido poll. So all you need to do is get your phone and join at slido.com, and if you put that number in or if you scan the QR code, you should be able to join this link. And I'm just going to take a minute or like a minute or so of silence just for us to think about what are these cross-cutting impacts of industrial animal agriculture. What are the issues at stake here? What are people campaigning on? And yeah, I'm just going to give a minute or so of silence for us to think about that. And if you could put it through on Slido, that would be great, and it will come up on the screen. Okay, maybe it's a bit too early in the morning to to be doing something like this, or maybe it's just a bit difficult to think about these different cross-cutting impacts. But that's okay. This session is here to talk through all of those impacts and those issues and how we could, you know, build solidarity across this movement. Okay, great. We've got one come up on the screen. Loss of biodiversity. That's yeah, definitely true with the vast amount of deforestation that is required to produce the meat at this scale. But yeah, I just wanted to use this space here as a sort of blank slate to think about, you know, before we go into any of the technicals of what this movement looks like, what are the actual issues that are underpinning this sector? And we're going to go more into it, so that's fine. And yeah, I will carry on. So before we get into talking about the technicals of the movement, I thought it would be a good chance to clarify what we mean when we say big meat or big livestock or big dairy. So this phrase is, like I said, something that we use in parallel to the fossil fuel divestment movement, so big oil and big gas. But it's a bit ambiguous. Like, what does it actually mean? Who are we actually targeting? Because when we're targeting we're targeting an industry, it's very easy to get mixed up about who we're targeting and which industry we're trying to dismantle. And we get a lot of questions actually, like, are you trying to get rid of all meat? You know, all of these questions, people are very concerned about the very specific type of farming that we are targeting. And I just wanted to make it clarify it here that when we say big meat, we're talking about what's on the left here, the intense farming, often called factory farming in the UK. And I wanted to compare it here to a farm that we are not targeting at all. This is a pastoral farm in Sudan, and that is absolutely not who we are targeting through our campaigning, but that's just us. We see the problem really lying in the big corporate industrial animal feedlots, rather than the small ones that I guess are pictured on the left, on the right here. And yeah, there's a huge difference in these types of farm, and I can't underscore that enough, really. There's a huge difference mainly in the land, so who owns the land, who is being nurtured by the land, who is being exploited by the land, scale as well. Just to give you an example, JBS, which is the biggest big meat company in the world, they have a leading slaughter capacity. To put it in perspective, they slaughter 85,000 heads of cattle a day, 70,000 pigs, and 12 million birds, and that's just in one day. So that's in 24 hours. That's something that these small farms on the right cannot even compete with. It is beyond absurd. I mean, I am not sure about you, but I can't even picture that many heads of cattle. I just can't. So yeah, there is a huge difference here, and a difference that often gets overlooked when we talk about these farms as well is the livelihoods as well that underpins them. So smaller farms, like, they are less exploitative of their workforce. The bigger farms, the bigger corporate-owned farms often have a lot of issues down to the workforce as well, which I will go into later. So yeah, just wanted to underscore that difference between what we mean when we say big meat and big livestock. And yeah, just to put, I guess, a face or a brand to those stats and figures, these are the biggest meat and dairy companies in the world. Now this is taken from their emissions, and I just want to state as well that emissions isn't the only thing, although fossil fuels and big livestock, they both have huge implications for emissions. I just want to underscore that is not the be all and end all, but it does give you a good picture about who we're talking about and who's operating in this space. And I'm not sure about you, but I was very surprised when I first looked at this. When I first joined Feedback at the beginning of this year, because I had probably heard of Nestle and Arla, but aside from anything else, I honestly couldn't recognize any of them. And considering that these are huge companies, they are operating at such a scale, it's kind of absurd that we are not familiar with Cargill. We're not familiar with Fonterra. I had never heard of Vion before. They are so good at hiding behind smaller brands and really evading public scrutiny in the same way that fossil fuels haven't been able to. Well, they have, but at this point, everyone's kind of getting behind fossil fuel divestment at the moment. But yeah, these companies, they've done so well at cultivating their message and making sure that they do not come under public scrutiny. And what I want to highlight is that now is the time to expose these companies, to really, put it out there and really shift what people's perceptions are of them. There's an underpinning principle of fossil fuel divestment is this idea of, really shaming the companies and making them look bad. So there's a social stigma behind them. There are so many scandals that, are underpinning all of these different companies. So many of them rely on really precarious labor forces, or the deforestation or the biodiversity losses someone mentioned earlier. There are so many stories out there, and they just don't catch on. People need to get angry about this, and I'm here to I guess make you angry about it. But yeah, again, these are just some of the companies, and just a quick stat to put it in perspective. So in the UK here, 30% of all of our pork and 30% of all of our chicken is now controlled by firms in the US, and animal feed even is pretty much controlled by Cargill as well, over here in the UK. And yeah, these companies, like all together, the 5 biggest companies here, they emit more than ExxonMobil. So again, that's putting it into perspective with the fossil fuel industry. And yeah, just to go into a bit more detail about who is behind these companies. This is Hosley and Wesley Batista from JBS. So if I go back, you will see JBS is the biggest meat and dairy company in the world. So these brothers are behind this company. And yeah, this company, JBS in particular, they paint quite a good picture of what the whole industry is really about. So this company is, they have upwards of 1 million employees, yet they are repeatedly under criticism for exploiting their employees, exploiting the land that they are on. So they operate in, they reportedly operate in a lot of legal and illegal operations in Brazil. You just need to do a quick Google search and you'll be able to see all of the accusations that have been put past them. And in terms of land exploitation, land grabbing, cattle washing is something that you might have heard of as well, when these companies, they buy cattle from illegal land, bring it to legal land, and therefore they kind of they evade scrutiny for having that cattle that's illegal in the first place. And yeah, these 2 brothers, just go back to JBS, they have repeatedly been accused of bribing politicians. They, in fact, were fined $3.2 billion for reportedly bribing politicians, and this is one of the largest in corporate history. So many newspapers have also reported about how they have sort of price fixed the meat. So they have, I guess, coordinated with other meat buyers to drive down the prices of meat from farmers, therefore exploiting the livelihoods of those farmers. So again, they're operating on very different levels. They are really putting profit and profit only at the top of their priorities. Livelihoods, land justice, sustainability is definitely not on the agenda for JBS. And again, just to put it into context, so Cargill, the Cargill family in the US, they are Cargill is the largest privately owned company in the US. They have a revenue of 114 billion, and they are the richest family in the world. They have more billionaires in the family than any other family. That's 14 billionaires. What company needs 14 billionaires whilst, you know, the people who are actually making the meat, the people who are at the bottom of the chain, who are in their slaughterhouses, in their meatpacking plants, who are catching COVID, you know, there's a whole dynamic here where you've got the top people at the, you know, the people at the top really profiting off of livelihoods, off of land, off of biodiversity, all of these things that are really sacred to our planet and how we eat. Yes, so what do we do now? This is a tricky question, and I think it's a question that a lot of people have been, of course, grappling with for quite a while now. What do we do with these companies? What do we do when these people are profiting out of so much destruction and they have evaded scrutiny? Nobody knows what these companies are. Nobody really, you know, is outraged by Cargill. Who on the street, you know, if you tell them like about Cargill would get annoyed at that? But you know, you say Shell, you say BP, and people have been campaigning for so long to really tarnish BP and Shell's image that they have really, I guess, like garnered this sort of shame and disgust around them. And that's something that I'm going to suggest that we need to replicate for this industry, given the parallels and the ways that they operate, and the emissions costs, the livelihoods that are cost in the making of these products. So yeah, what do we do now? This photo is actually from a recent protest. Some protesters from Animal Rebellion in Cornwall here in the UK, they recently protested based on some of the work that we've recently been doing around investments. So they are here protesting outside of banks in Truro and ABC here to get them to divest. And yeah, I think this is just a good example of how people are really going beyond the plate when we talk about food. A lot of narrative around food activism, I guess, particularly in the West, particularly in the UK as well, has really focused on what we're eating and the choices that we make, when we go to the supermarket, or what ends up on our plate. But often, whilst these are really empowering things and things that I also, try to do in my daily life, they can often be, there are factors that are often out of our control that happen before we can even make those choices. And for a lot of people, going beyond the plate can be an opportunity to explore different avenues and perhaps exercise more agency and take more control when we're trying to tackle this industry. So I'm not saying that there's a divide here, or there's an either or between what we do, what we choose to do, and the activism perhaps in, I guess, like this sense that I'm talking about, divestment, protesting, direct action, that sort of thing. There's not a divide here, but there's a way that these different tactics can really complement each other. And divestment is a tactic that can really bring that in for the, for food activism. So again, we've moved beyond, so when we talk about the fossil fuel industry, we've really moved beyond talking about switching off lights, recycling, cycling to work. We have really moved beyond that and begun to see the structural underpinnings of how this industry really reaps profit and destruction out of our earth. So why don't we bring that discourse? Why don't we bring that energy to the fossil fuel divestment movement? Because that's something that we haven't really seen before, and we're seeing now results within fossil fuel divestment that it's a tactic that works. It really does work. So why don't we bring that into the activism that we do around food and industrial livestock? So again, this is just a photo from a protest, one of the last protests I did at university. I graduated pretty recently. There are points if you can spot me in this photo. But yeah, this is a photo from one of my last protests when I was at university, and it was a protest to get our university to divest from fossil fuels. And the reason why I wanted to bring this in here and share that with you today is because I feel like there's a way in which the fossil fuel divestment movement has changed and adapted and accommodated for and really grounded itself in solidarity that I think the food activism movement can really learn from. So fossil fuel divestment, when I was at university at least, was in my first year, it was really kind of a single issue campaign. So what I mean by single issue is the campaign narrative and the campaign language really focused around the environment, really focused around fossil fuels, and didn't really get beyond social justice or solidarity with other existing activist movements on campus. So that was kind of like the shape of it. And I got involved. I went to campaign meetings and was really energized by the people there and the movement and being able to have agency in a way that I had never really been able to have before. But this kind of changed when our university, so in a UK context, in 2018, we had a huge organised strikes organised by the University and Colleges Union over pensions, staff pensions at UK universities, and this led to a lot of staff strikes. And it was an issue that a lot of people got behind, and it was an issue that was energising a lot of people on campus and in that moment. So when this issue kind of, when the UCU strikes happened, we changed tactics. We radically changed to a more solidarity-based actions. So to put this into context, we ran what's the word for it? Occupations in the main university buildings. We actually did 2 occupations to get the university to go back on their decision for pension cuts for staff. And most of the people who were in that space were people from the fossil fuel divestment movement, as well as a lot of other people from other student movements within the campus. And to be able to be in that space and to kind of share demands with other activists and show that support in a material way, so occupying a building for other student movements and in solidarity with other staff, that was a material and spiritual connection of solidarity in that physical space. And that really changed the way that student activism worked on campus during that year, because it went from just fossil fuels and just the pension cuts and decolonizing the curriculum. I'm sure many of you here have heard about that before. Decolonizing the curriculum was also an issue that was gaining more and more support. These things were separate, but in having these occupations, in demonstrating together, in rallying together and having protests and singing together and shouting together, it actually became a narrative that was really foregrounded in democracy and decision-making within the university itself. And that support, that mutual cross-cutting, cross-issue support and solidarity that we shared together really was pivotal in the way we got more support for the campaign, really understood our issues, and actually affected change as well. And this was successful, this divestment movement. It was only a few months ago, so way after I left, but only a few months ago that Cambridge actually decided to divest, which is great news. But yeah, it's by shifting and I guess broadening out and taking on board different issues and really understanding the context of your own communities that you're working in can really shape the results of your campaign. So yeah, again, it changed to, I'm sure there's like a poster or a placard here that says Corporation Cambridge or something like that. So it became a narrative between the people at the top of the university and us, and an issue of like democratization. So yeah, that's how that divestment movement in that particular context worked to I guess shape solidarity in a way that really affected change. So coming back to the issue of industrial livestock farming, I want us to think about the cross-cutting issues and the different impacts of big livestock, of big meat and dairy, of industrial animal agriculture. And that can help us think about the ways that we perhaps move in a space where there are other campaigns, particularly when we're talking on a global scale. There's so much happening and there are so many dynamics that we need to be mindful of, that it's important that we are aware of this. And what I'm going to do is just skim through some of the impacts. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this already, and there's a lot of research that you can do on this. It doesn't take long to type one company scandal or controversy and you'll have heaps and heaps of things come up. That's just how bad it is. But yeah, I guess like putting one of these impacts into context. More recently, we've got the health aspect of this industry. So yeah, the four biggest US meat companies, so Tyson, WH Group, JBS, and Hormel. So JBS are those brothers who I mentioned earlier. Hormel makes spam. Tyson, they're also notorious. They paid dividends that took their annual payouts to shareholders to over $1 billion. And at the same time, they've, whilst paying out their shareholders huge sums of money, they've had the biggest COVID hotspots in their meat packing plants. They don't protect their workers. And then there was actually a case where they are reportedly blaming their employees and their own living conditions for the outbreaks, rather than the fact that they're really cramped together in the meatpacking plants, in very cold, minus whatever temperatures that really suppresses the immune system just to keep the meat preserved. So instead of investing and perhaps slowing down their production lines, they sped up and called it a food crisis and made a load of profit out of it. So these are the companies that are profiting out of a crisis, out of a global crisis. And of course, this impacted Black and Latino and other marginalized identities within their workforce disproportionately compared to their white employees. And this is an issue of racism, of structural racism, and it's ongoing. I will go into more organizational actions that have happened around this, but that's just something to bear in mind with the health implications of this industry. Some of you have already mentioned the biodiversity loss, land grabbing, cattle laundering, which I mentioned earlier about, kind of like money laundering, cattle laundering, and like land injustice. That is a huge issue to get behind. There are lots of people on the ground in areas in the Amazon and the Cerrado regions in South America who are really organizing on the issue. There are indigenous rights activists in North America as well who are campaigning on the issue. It's a lot of their communities who are, being devastated by the land impacts of this industry, extraction from communities is another big thing as well. Here in the UK, in Herefordshire, Moy Park, which is owned by JBS, they operate huge chicken factories in Herefordshire, and the local residents around there are organising and mobilising against planning of more chicken factories because of the amount of pollution and destruction it's causing to their own families and communities as well. Just like an equivalent example on screen on the background here, we have got a farm from Iowa. You don't need to look too far to find the devastating impacts of big livestock in Iowa. These lagoons, these pink lagoons, are full of crap, and it's just seeping out onto the local communities. It is being sprayed into nearby towns. It's disgusting, and nothing is going to stop big livestock from making a profit. There's nothing going to stop them from turning, a few billion to their shareholders. And that's what underpins the industry. They don't have the best interests at heart. They will just extract for profit in so many ways, so across biodiversity, land, health, the labour force impacts as well. So again, another Slido poll. I want to take 30 seconds to think about what you and other campaigners have in common. So if you are a campaigner already working on food issues or issues of meat and dairy, then what's the context in which you work and do your activism? Where are the cross-cutting issues there? It's a difficult question to do on the spot, but if you can and if you would like to share, then I'd really welcome you to. So again, you can join at slido.com and just type in the number there. It's 57993, or there's the QR code. But yeah, if there are other campaign issues that you share with other activists, perhaps in your community, perhaps within the space that you are working in, whether you are vegan and working on vegan issues, what are the other issues that perhaps aren't, clear, what are they? What can you bring into the movement? What can you welcome? So I'm just going to take 30 seconds for anybody to bring this up. This is great. I'm really enjoying reading all of these. Great. I'm seeing them all pop up now. So yeah, when we talk about, and please do keep bringing them in, this is great. When we talk about issues of meat and dairy, the image that first comes to mind for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, is what's on your plate. And that is very effective. Food and what we consume is such a vital part of our lives that, it connects with so many people and so many parts of our lives, and it energizes so many of us. But what is hidden under our plates? We've got education, we've got health crises, deforestation, we have got the respect for nature, privilege and lack thereof, youth agency, agroecology, animal ethics. We've got all these different issues that, they're not there when you just look at a plate of food. You have to kind of tease them out, and you have to build those bridges of solidarity. You have to build and broaden those issues to really reframe the idea of industrial meat and dairy issues. So moving on, this last slide, this is from another one of the last protests I did at university. You'll see the banner here says decolonize and disarm. When it got to really the peak of our movement, to I guess bring all these issues that we were campaigning on together. So to recap, that was the UCU strikes, the decolonize movement, and disarm as well, divestment from weapons and arms. And yeah, we had this disarm, divest, decolonize sort of thing going on, and it really brought everyone together. We had hundreds of people mobilizing together on these 3-4 key issues, and it almost became one movement essentially within that summer. And I want to highlight the importance there of really broadening out, and really that's how at Feedback we're beginning to see the issues of industrial meat and dairy, and how we're beginning to mobilize on it, at least. And there are different ways of mobilizing on this issue. So I'm not saying this is the right way of doing it, but this is a way of garnering support across multiple levels of your campaign, and also getting really in depth with the different issues. So a material, I guess, example more recently about this in Big Livestock is how LULAC, so the League of United Latin American Citizens in the US, they organized a boycott of meat during the peak of the first peak of the COVID crisis in the summer earlier this year. And they organized this boycott. So boycotting meat in solidarity with Latin American workers who are being exploited within within these meatpacking plants controlled by, the likes of JBS and Cargill and Tyson and whatnot. And that was a really effective way of showing solidarity between the issues of meat and dairy consumption on an industrial scale and the migrant workers who were bearing the brunt of the crisis. And you can look that up. It was a great action. And yeah, that's just like one way of really building bridges and building solidarity as in order to movement build on industrial meat and dairy. So Big Livestock, we are following the money, and what we're doing is kind of building a divestment movement built on these principles. And we've done the research on this. So, you can start at your university, you can start at your bank, you can start on your pensions. There are asset managers, multinational development banks. There are lots and lots of ways of targeting this industry across different issues. So to round this all up, please join our activist training workshops that we are running, and you can find out more about that. I think there's a form that I think my 50 by 40 friends will drop here. If not, you can find it on our Twitter. And yeah, I've just linked that here below. And I think we're going to go to a Q&A now. So yeah, up to you, Alexa.
Wow, thank you so much, Mia. I have so much respect for your work and appreciation. I mean, you're being confronted on a daily basis with these big words. You have big meat and just emissions, profit. It's just wow. So thank you so much for your insights here. And I suggest that the way we go about it is that we have a few questions tumbling in on Slido that you shared. So I just combined the chat box and Slido questions, and I'm just going to direct them to you from the participants, and then we can move that way. So I want to start with the first question from Isabel, and she is saying, well, first of all, great to hear one major method of making change in this area is to create a social stigma. What is the single most effective tactic to create that, in your experience?
Hi, Isabel. I think I actually know Isabel, so nice to see you here. So yeah, the single biggest tactic, I would say really starting with meetings, whether that's in your campus, whether that's in your community, starting with open meetings where you can really voice together in a really, I guess, like democratic way, and hearing and listening and really exercising, active listening for other people's concerns on the issue, to kind of go beyond what your preconceptions are of industrial meat and dairy and be very, very open to what other issues are that cross-cut them. And from these open meetings, from beginning to organize, I think divestment is a great way of getting there. Building a divestment movement, whether that's targeting, again, your university, your college, whether that's your pensions. You can find out from your employer like who and where your pension goes. Really starting there, and again, like, definitely get in contact with us to run workshops and whatnot to figure out the best tactic, because it really depends in what context you're in. Like the example I gave about Cambridge was definitely specific to what was going on there, the timings of the UCU strikes and the decolonise movement as well. So it's really specific, but I would suggest that divestment is
Great, thank you. All right, Michelle is asking, or first she's saying, thanks, Mia, for sharing your thoughts. I agree on that. Do you know of any dairy and livestock divestment campaigns that we can draw inspiration from in terms of coalition building, advocacy avenues, social media content, tools, and strategy?
Of course. So a few I can point out here. So LULAC, who I mentioned earlier, the League of United Latin American Citizens, they did their meat boycott, and that was covered in the press in the States. I would really recommend looking up the action, because that was really, really great, a great sign of solidarity, and a really great tactic as well, really redefining what like a boycott of meat products is, and shaping who we're benefiting, who you're really putting in like the the picture of that particular action. So the Latin American workers within the meatpacking plants, they were the focus of that issue. I thought that campaign was great. Seeding Sovereignty, they are also, I think they've been involved in some of the 50 by 40 summit as well. I really recommend checking out their work. They are great at really framing this issue. And yeah, they are an Indigenous women-led resistance based in the US. I really recommend checking out their work for the language they use around, particularly if you're interested around like the framing of land justice and these corporations, because these corporations, they need a lot of land to operate their huge farms. So land, starting from the land and how to talk about the land is great. And yeah, I would also recommend Synergia Animal and Global Forest Coalition, another 50 by 40 friends here. They also have great work on framing this issue, particularly when we're talking about people on the front lines of the impacts of this industry. But definitely checking out, I guess, the other 50 by 40 panelists and yeah, the toolkits and whatnot that's going on.
Nice. I love to see, the network working its magic, and you just, from the top of your head, just, picking all these recommendations that you had. That's so fascinating.
So many.
Yeah, there's which is great, right? I mean, wow. All right. I guess we're dealing with another praise here from David. So he's saying, thank you for your great insights. Beyond how students can mobilize to demand their universities divest, what other high impact levers for divestments are there?
Of course. So I appreciate that getting involved on campus or at university is can be quite exclusionary, and I totally recognise that. And as a lot of the divestment movements talk about, Harvard or Yale in the US, they get a lot of coverage, and that's if you're not involved in those spaces, it's very exclusionary. And yeah, that's definitely a valid critique of, I'm not sure if you are critiquing the divestment movement, but I think that is a very valid critique of the fossil fuel divestment movement. And in the UK, a lot of campuses, I think it's nearly 90 campuses have divested from fossil fuels now. So a lot of, different sorts of universities, colleges and campuses that have been getting involved. I'd also recommend religious, if you are religious, if you're a part of a religious community, that can be a really effective way of garnering support for these issues and talking about it within a context that really gels within your community. And yeah, we've done a few actions around multinational development banks. So we're talking about publicly owned or state-owned banks that are using public money, or money that should be spent on developing and being invested in things that are good, being invested into these sort of companies. So we've done a bit of campaigning on that. And if you go to Feedback's website, if you go to Synergia Animal's website or GFC, Global Forest Coalition, we've done some work on this together. So that's, I guess, like a top level, sort of like global level of divestment that we've been working on. But yeah, again, on a more localized level, your pensions or your bank, where are you banking? Where are you putting your money in your pocket? You can totally switch that bank and tell people why you're switching your bank and expressing your concerns about industrial meat and dairy. That can be a great way of doing it, like out of your own like personal like choices, as well as the multinational banks or the other ways of getting involved.
There's really so many things that you can take as an individual, right? Like the ways to create change yourself. We have this great bank in Germany that I just switched to recently. So yeah, I'm glad you said that. So going to Laura's question, we have so many questions tumbling in. It's really exciting. She's asking, when the money is divested, how can we ensure that it ends up with the right industry? So does your ask include recommendations for green investments as well?
Of course, and that's a question that the fossil fuel divestment movement really gets quite a lot as well. Like, once you've pulled the money out, where does it go? What are you putting it into? Because if you're putting it into weapons or something, we don't want it to go there. And there's a very material danger of that. But when we talk about a just transition for the meat and dairy sector, so moving and transforming this whole sector that produces so many emissions, when we're talking about transforming the sector, so not just transforming the investments of one particular institution, but transforming the sector as a whole, there's a wider conversation that needs to be had. And whereas we've had a lot of conversations about what a just transition for the fossil fuel industry looks like, I feel like a conversation around a just transition for food and meat and dairy is something that's yet to really be mainstreamed. So definitely having that conversation, exploring it more, and we facilitate workshops on that as well. So that can also be something that you can do in dialogue with us, explore in dialogue with us. And yeah, it's so when we talk about divestment campaigning, the way we, I guess, like garner a lot of support is by making a demand that's very clear, by saying, divest from this industry. And then it's after divesting, after, everyone can get behind how awful these companies are, but the issue of where to spend it afterwards is a little bit more nuanced, and something that a lot of people haven't quite grappled yet fully in a way to make it mainstream. So when we're talking about our divestment movement, we prioritize moving the money out of this industry as quickly as possible, stigmatizing this industry, so that when we talk about the different types of meat, when I said at the beginning, big meat versus, I guess, like little meat or small meat, we can think about those differences and really extract the key differences between these corporations and these small scale farmers or more regenerative practices. So to put it in short, there's a conversation to be had, but in terms of campaign tactics, it's really useful to go hard and fast for, divest at the beginning, and then have that conversation after you've stigmatized the industry and really put in the mainstream the difference between these different types of farming.
And we're already diving straight into these big conversations with your session, right? So that's a start right there. All right, we have Rishi asking, how can we work to increase transparency? Big corporations and their investment relationships can be a minefield to the layperson consumer.
Of course, and this is all about how they operate to make it as opaque as possible. So people feel so detached from the issues at hand. People don't feel, I guess, responsible in some way, that they can make a difference or that they have any agency. The forest fires in Brazil, in the Amazon and the Cerrado regions, how do they have anything to do with us in the UK here? It's really, they've done so well at detaching the consumer from the consumer. I don't really like using that word, but detaching the consumer from the issues that they've made it so convoluted and so difficult. So definitely, we need to hold them account. So much effort has been put over the years to engage these industries in bettering their practices, making commitments to this sustainable X, Y, and Z, but they still haven't done it. And frankly, they're probably not going to do it. So we're saying divest and cut all ties with the industry. Enough is enough. And this is how you really stigmatize the industry, doing niceties and, engagement. There are people there who do that, and there's a very valuable space for doing that. Change can be made from doing that. I need to, I express that change can be made in that way, but there is also a space to outright reject these companies for who they are and for what they are, because they've had enough time to change. They haven't changed. So let's dismantle the industry.
What a word. I was so surprised as well when you showed that slide with the 35 biggest meat and dairy companies. And it's just mind-boggling how they managed to stay undercover for so long and still are, right? So I just wanted to share that, that I was amazed by that as well. Amazed, I don't know. what's the right word here, but sharing your thoughts there. So we have Michelle asking again, are there any funds you can recommend to invest in plant-based food systems?
I wish I knew off the top of my head, but sadly, a lot of my job just involves, I guess, the negative aspects of it. But there are, I'm sure you guys can share this later, but there is actually a fund tracker which you can you can Google and then see whether it's like deforestation free. I can't quite remember who did that, but there is definitely a way of figuring it out. But on the spot here, to be honest, I haven't done enough research into that. Oh, see, we've got 50 by 40 magically posting a link there. They'd be much better placed to answer that question.
Yeah, it's nice to see the background work being done. I'm also amazed by that. Okay, next question from Animal Rebellion. They joined us with asking, do you have any examples or case studies of divestment from livestock amongst banks or other institutions?
Yes, so we've had a few divestment wins this year, actually. We've had a few investment managers start to exclude specific companies, and there hasn't been, we're starting to see investors seeing this industry as like a material and financial risk as well, because of climate change, because of COVID, because of all these different, these awful things that they're doing, deforestation and things that we've talked about and I'm sure you're aware about. There's actually a financial risk involved in this industry as well, and these investors are starting to see it. And over the past year, we've seen investors start to divest from specific companies. Now we want we want a movement build, so we want this to get bigger, and we really want the stigmatization aspect from civil society, from activists to really mobilize around that. But yes, we have seen divestment this year, and there have been moments of like, aha, like people are seeing the issue, and yeah, people seeing the material and financial risk. It is definitely happening already.
All right. We have time for one last question coming your way, which is Feedback's goal to build a people-powered campaign/movement to demand divestment, research to strengthen the campaign, more traditional NGO-esque meetings with policyholders, or some or all of the above? In essence, what's Feedback's theory of change?
So this is really a simple answer. We go by this sort of radical flank theory, which is, I guess, like a technical way of saying what we do. But we position ourselves as an outlier, push for the most radical options. So, that's divesting from the whole industry, dismantling this whole industry and these corporations by building a movement. Yes, like as you say, a people-powered campaign, by really activating activists around this issue and stigmatizing it in the most, I guess, like extreme way possible. But I don't think it's extreme. By just saying that this industry can't exist anymore because of the planet, because of the people, and because of the animals. By saying that, we position ourselves as an outlier to really stigmatize the industry. Now, as I said, there is space for people to do negotiating and to really, I guess, do the engagement. There's definitely work to be done there. But for us, we are putting our efforts into building a movement around this. And yeah, part of what we do is a lot of research as well. So we've done the research into the banks and investors who are pumping money into this industry. So we do the research, but so it can be used by campaigners and activists to movement build, if that makes sense. And yeah, all of our reports and our research are on our website as well, if you wanted to have a look.
Thank you so much, Mia. One thing that you just said was, or earlier when answering the last question, we want this to get bigger. And I think this is a really great ending statement. So I thank you for your time and your insights. And yes, I'm just happy to see where we will meet again. And yeah, I hope you enjoy your day. Thank you.